Therefore, whoever breaks one of these, the least of these commandments, and teaches others to do the same, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Those verses are important because what Jesus will say next will seem as if he's trying to contradict the Torah or the Jewish laws. But in fact, he was simply strengthening those laws that were given to the Jews. In the gospel for today, Jesus emphasizes that a life of holiness does not only involve avoiding certain acts, such as murder or adultery, but it involves the thoughts and feelings behind those actions. If we are able to control our thoughts and feelings, then we need not worry about murdering someone or committing adultery. Jesus begins by saying to his audience, "You have heard it said to those in ancient times, you shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with your brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say you fool, you will be liable to the hell of fire." In this Sermon on the Mount, we encounter what can be described as an antithesis. The title is derived from Jesus' practice within these verses of voicing a particular idea. For example, you have heard it said, and then stating a contrasting idea. But I tell you, what Jesus does here is that he contrasts what the Jews learned from the Torah, and therefore assuming a godly status. Jesus, however, is not contradicting the laws of the Torah, but instead is trying to fulfill them by guiding his disciples into adherence, not by the letter of the law, but with the will of God that inspired the law. As we look through the antithesis, we become ever cognizant of the fact that we have failed to meet Jesus' standard of neighborly living. Jesus continues by saying, "You shall not murder." The original commandment is found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, and in Deuteronomy 5, verse 17. The commandments, which are written in Hebrew, indicate the intentional and unlawful taking of human life. The Torah makes a distinction between murder and other forms of bloodshed and provides a guide for determining whether bloodshed constitutes murder, as seen in Deuteronomy 17, verse 8 to 13. It allows for capital punishment and prescribes the death penalty for various offenses. It allows killing in self-defense and in wars carried out according to God's will. It, however, differentiates between manslaughter, which could be described as accidental, and murder, which is intentional and unauthorized, and treats them differently. Jesus continues, "But I say to you, if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment." Jesus expands the commandment beyond only the act of murder, but to thoughts, feelings, and actions that result in murder. Jesus challenges us to address the issues of evil while it still resides within our thoughts and our feelings, in our hearts, and before it is expressed in our words and our deeds. Jesus calls on each of us to reconcile with our brother or sister in order that only godly feelings will be harbored, so that we may overcome the evil feelings of our hearts once our hearts are right with God, then we will no longer be tempted to murder, but instead will demonstrate love, which is the acceptable response to our neighbor and even to our enemies. As we delve into the text for today, brothers and sisters, we continue to experience acts of violence and murder within our very own society. Jesus' words today seek to direct us along a better path of existence. It is said that since 1962, some 40,829 murders have been committed within our country. In 2018, there were 1,287 murders, and in 2017, 1,647. In January of this year alone, there were 116 murders, and that number has since increased significantly since the start of this month. According to the Interdevelopment Bank in a 2013 study, gang-related motives accounted for 79% of all murders. Non-gang-related motives, including robbery, accounted for 14%, and domestic conflicts accounted for 6%. Another statistic asserts that Jamaica's homicide rate is nearly 8 times the global average. And this, brothers and sisters, is not something that has arisen in recent times, but this has been our culture for decades. Many will attribute the violent nature of our people to psychological damage from the period of slavery, while others will focus on the lack of employment opportunity and the social disconnect. But whatever the factors or reasons, friends, it is clear that we cannot continue on the path that we are on. Jesus reminds us that it is not what goes into our mouth that defiles a person, but it is what comes out of us that defiles. And when Peter asked him for an explanation, he responded, "But what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this is what defiles. For out of the heart come evil intentions." And this is what Jesus emphasizes throughout this section of the Sermon on the Mount. In light of the challenges we face, Jesus calls us to explore a tangible response to all the ills that we face within our society. From the Sermon on the Mount, we recognize that doing what is right is more significant than simply knowing what is right. Jesus reminds his disciples, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." The religious leaders of Jesus' day knew the law and they enforced it. But in many instances in Scripture, they really never practiced what they taught. And Jesus, of course, responds by saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moses. Therefore, do what they teach you and follow it. But do not do as they do, for they do not practice what they teach." Jesus calls us today, brothers and sisters, to be holy people. To be holy means to be set apart for God's purposes. We are expected to be mature, complete people who have fulfilled the purpose for which God has created us. God calls all of us to be holy and to be set apart for God's purposes. But we know, friends, that there are many within our society who enforce laws, but who believe that they are exempt from these very laws, just as the Pharisees did. There are many who know the right things to do, but instead they choose otherwise because they will never be caught, or because no one is looking. When we are faced with a choice between good or evil in secret, that is the true test of our integrity. Jesus' reasoning comes to the fore because when we are able to control our secret thoughts and feelings, it leads to mature decisions that benefit not only ourselves, but benefit our neighbors. If we intend, brothers and sisters, to truly become the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business, then our leaders ought to be people of high moral standards. Many times, the man on the street justifies his wrongdoing by highlighting the fact that those in authority commit similar evils, but escape ultimate judgment. And so, by that reasoning, the ordinary man on the street believes that he also should be able to do wrong and also get away with it. Jesus reminds us, however, that every single one of us are liable to judgment. We must, brothers and sisters, be committed to the cause of good. But undertaking correct actions, we must ensure that we don't only speak of these actions, but we actually undertake those actions. Far too long, brothers and sisters, within our society, we have been speaking about all the good things that we need to do, but no one has decided to actually do the things that we need to do. It is a call for us, friends, to be active. To be active for Christ. To be active for our neighbor. In addition, Jesus invites us to recognize the importance of reconciliation. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gifts. Jesus challenges us to take the initiative when we are offended. In verses 23 to 24, he further challenges us to take the initiative when our brother or sister has something against us. It does not matter whether we are wrong or we are right, whether we are the accused or the accuser. Either way, we are expected to take the initiative as people of God. Jesus lays the responsibility squarely on us. We are not to blame one another. We are not to wait for the other person to initiate reconciliation. We are being instructed that we are the ones to initiate reconciliation, even if we feel that we have been wrong, and even if we have other important matters to address, even if we are preparing to approach the altar of God. In Jesus' time, making an offering to the temple altar was a solemn duty. But Jesus hastens to say that the greater duty is to reconcile with our brother or sister. Jesus calls us to give reconciliation top priority, not as a duty for our own pleasure, but as a duty to glorify God. Disharmony, brothers and sisters, oftentimes is a barrier between God and us, and it restricts the process of reconciliation. In order to achieve harmony with God, we must first achieve harmony with our brothers and sisters. Jesus instructs us to take the responsibility of that first step. And if you think about how things were within Jesus' time, what Jesus is asking these people would have been very, very difficult. So, what would have happened when they came to the temple altar? was that they would have brought live animals for sacrifices. And so imagine carrying an animal to the temple for a sacrifice, a live animal, but then being told that you must leave it and then first go and address a matter with your brother or sister. For many, it would have seemed quite impractical. For many of the persons who came to the temple altar were traveling great distances with these animals, and it would be quite burdensome for them to leave their animals unattended in order to go to address a matter with their brother or sister. But this gives us an idea, brothers and sisters, as to how Christ feels about our disunity. Many of us friends decide not to take on reconciliation because for us, we may seem weak. And especially for men, we believe that if we are the one to effect reconciliation, that it takes away from our manhood. And so in Jamaica, there's a term that we use often when we don't want to forgive or to attempt reconciliation. You hear a lot of us say, "Now make a friend," which is exactly how we approach situations. But it is oftentimes our pride that leads to anger and causes us to sin. And this is why, brothers and sisters, that action called restorative justice has been a good initiative in helping to address some of the fundamental issues that we have as a people. When we are able to sit down and talk frankly about the things that hurt us and be comfortable in sharing and exploring different solutions to our problems, we find that we create stronger bonds and new relationships blossom as a result. Facilitating reconciliation will assist in our quest of addressing instances of murder, of domestic violence, of gang warfare that continue to erode the bedrock of this nation. If we are able, brothers and sisters, to effect reconciliation between our brothers and sisters, over time, we will see the positive change that we need within our society. This, however, brothers and sisters, takes time and it takes effort. And those of us who call ourselves Christians must take the time and effort to see to it that whenever we encounter instances where people have feuds or disagreements, that we are able to step in and offer the gift of reconciliation. Within the Sermon on the Mount, brothers and sisters, Jesus also underlines the need for love and forgiveness. God is love, and if we consider ourselves as people of God, then we ought to live as people of love. The foundation on which the Sermon on the Mount was taught was based on love. Love is not a mushy feeling that we get in our stomach or in our belly button, or when people say they have butterflies. That is not what love is. It is the act of living a life based on the character of who God is. That is what love is, brothers and sisters. So there are many out there who proclaim to know Christ, but fail to love people. As a matter of fact, there are many out there who proclaim Christ, who fail to even love their very family members. Those people, brothers and sisters, are charlatans. They're frauds. They're antichrist. For it is love that keeps us from being angry with each other. It is love that keeps us from having disagreements with one another. And when we look within the reading, Jesus reminds us not to be angry with our brother or sister. And you may ask, what is wrong with being angry? But the kind of anger that Jesus describes in the passage is a kind of smoldering anger. The type of anger that a person nurtures and keeps alive. It is the kind that we deliberately allow to fester within our hearts over a period of time. It is the kind of anger that eats away from our very humanity and causes us to fall into sin. If we do not strengthen our relationship with the source of love, brothers and sisters, the source of love who is God, then we will be incapable of genuinely living lives of love. And it means that we will be genuinely unable to forgive. Unless our relationship with God is strong, unless our relationship with God is of such that even if we are angry, we are able to quell our anger, then the process of forgiveness will never be undertaken. When we bypass forgiveness, brothers and sisters, we allow unresolved issues to leave a scar on the offender and the offended. It facilitates evil, and the result is a bitter people whose only answer to one another is through violence. At present, brothers and sisters, that is what we face within our society. And the reality is that currently, Jamaica is ranked the third most violent country in Central America and the Caribbean. What is that telling us, brothers and sisters? It is telling us that we have a real problem. But what will our response be to this problem? How will we address this problem? Jesus calls us, friends, to live a new life in God and allows us the freedom to choose this life. Christ calls us to a higher standard of living. He calls us to a deeper commitment and a willingness to be transformed into intentional disciples. To answer that call, brothers and sisters, we must reorient our thinking and the way we live, just as how Jesus challenged his disciples on the Mount. Simply posting Bible verses on your Facebook wall or on your WhatsApp status is not enough. Saying that you're blessed or highly favored is not enough. Telling people to do the right thing and not doing it yourself cannot be enough. But we are called, friends, to live the very life that we read of in the Bible. To live the very life that Christ lived. To do right unto our brothers and sisters. To love them. Christ calls us to do what we ought to do to build the relationships that we have with one another. Christ calls us to love, to forgive, and to be reconciled to one another. And as much as how we look around as friends, and we may believe that it's all darkness around us, there is always hope. For once we are here, and once we continue to try to give ourselves to God each day, then there is hope. We are being implored, brothers and sisters, as Jesus implored those around him on that mount, to do our best to live the life that he has called us to live. Let us not despair, but let us get to work. Let us not despair, but let us start taking action. For it is only through the action of those who follow Christ that we will be able to get the end results. We must get up and stand up for righteousness, and we must all try to live as God intended us to live. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.